This chapter is going to be about using materials to create shaders or surface properties on objects. Let's open up the material editor. We've seen it a couple times already in this course, but we just really glossed over it in order to do a couple of key operations, such as look at the environment map. But now we're going to go into the material editor and take a look at all of its major functions. We can launch the material editor from the main toolbar here, or by pressing the keyboard shortcut, which is M for materials. And we get the material editor opening. This is the so-called Slate material editor, and it is a node-based interface in which we can see all the various parts of a material or a shading network. We can connect those parts together and so on. Before we look at Slate, though, I do want to make a short detour into the Compact material editor. And this is an earlier version of the material editor that, as the name implies, is smaller and more compact. And maybe that's better for you. Maybe you prefer that interface. Maybe you don't need the node-based interface. So in that case, let's just take a look at the Compact material editor. We can switch over to the Compact material editor by going to the Modes menu here and choosing Compact material editor. And the main thing that we want to see here is the fact that we have these sample slots. And the sample slots are sort of a sandbox or a working area or a staging area for creating materials. And just because something's in a sample slot does not mean that it's actually on an object in the scene, and vice versa. You could have a material that exists in the scene, but does not exist in the Compact material editor. You could have a material that's here in the material editor in a slot, but is not in the scene. And the way that you know the difference is these little angle brackets in the corners. I previously created a material which is called white diffuse, and it's assigned to all the objects in the scene. And I know that it exists in the scene, once again, because it has these little angle brackets on it. Let's make a new material and assign it to an object. I'll click in the sample slot here, and we can go down here and choose what type of material shading we want. There are a bunch of different shading algorithms. And Blinn is named after Jim Blinn, the person who created it. And it's the most common one that you'll use a lot because it's very versatile. So I'll just stick with Blinn right now. And let's say I want just a flat black matte material. And in that case, I would go here and I would click on this swatch that's labeled diffuse. That's the base color of the material. Click on that and then bring it down to black or nearly black. Now notice, by the way, that our values are nonlinear. And that is because we have gamma correction enabled. When you're using ART, you have to have gamma enabled. And because of that, we have this, again, nonlinear curve to the brightness values. And that is kind of problematic, actually, because there's not a lot of numeric difference between, let's say, a value of 0 and a value of 1, but there's a lot of difference here in terms of the actual color. Okay, so as I increase this up to 2 or 3 or whatever, it's actually getting a lot brighter really quite quickly. And this is a type of material called standard. We can see it says standard here. And what we're seeing here is just a range from 0 to 255, and that's with the standard material. Okay, I'll set the value here to something pretty low, like maybe 9 or whatever. And then once I've created that material, it exists in a sample slot, but it's not assigned to any objects. I can assign it just by dragging and dropping, or I can click on this button that will assign the material to the selected objects. I'm currently just going to select these lamps here, and they're in a group, so if I select any one of them, I'll select all of them and all the parts. And then I can click on this button to assign that material to the selection. And now they all turn black. And I want to give this a name as well. I'll select this and I'll call it matte black. That's the general process. If we want to grab a material from the scene, then we can use this little eyedropper here. I can, for example, select a different slot, click on the eyedropper, and then click on an object, and it loads that material into the current slot. And now I've got two different versions of matte black. And I know, once again, that this version is the one that's present in the scene because it's got these little angle brackets. And additionally, if the angle bracket is solid, that indicates that we've selected an object that has that material applied. If I deselect those objects, then we get these open triangles. There's a lot going on in here. We're not going to cover everything, of course, in the Compact Material Editor. I just wanted to show you that you have the ability to invoke that. One last point, if you need to change the options for the Material Editor, then you actually have to go into the Compact Material Editor. And there is an option button here. That option button, for some reason, is not present in the Slate Material Editor. If you click on this, you can go in and control things like what's the size of your sample object and what's the default size of a texture here in a sample slot. Again, you may need to go in here and adjust these things. If you're using the Slate Material Editor, you'll have to switch modes to the Compact Material Editor, and then and only then will you have access to this option box dialog.